The air was thick with excitement as the ceremony ended, and the campus buzzed with families rushing to celebrate their graduates. There I stood, diploma in hand, amidst a sea of faces, proud, hopeful, and eager for what the future held. This day was supposed to be about me, a culmination of years of late nights, endless assignments, and challenges I'd faced alone. But as I stepped into the rented hall where my family had gathered, the weight of my father's voice came crashing down. "And no one's coming to your party! Grow up!" he shouted, his words cutting through the room like a cold wind. I froze, the sting of the words reverberating in my chest. My hands, once filled with excitement, now trembled slightly as I clutched the edges of my graduation gown. I had expected some sort of congratulatory nod, a simple well done, maybe even a hug. But instead, my father's anger filled the space, making everything feel like a cruel joke. His face, red with frustration, told me everything I needed to know. This achievement meant nothing to him. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. For so long, I had hoped this day would be different, hoped that my family would finally see me for who I had become, not just the disappointment they had always labeled me. But now, standing in front of them, I realized something. No amount of achievement, no matter how hard-earned, would ever change their perception of me. "It's just a cheap degree," I managed to say, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion, though inside, everything was crumbling. I wasn't angry anymore, not with him. I was just done. My father didn't even flinch at my response. He waved me off, already turning back to the drinks table with my mother, as if my words had no weight, no meaning. And that's when the anger hit me, not the fiery, loud kind that he was so used to throwing at me, but a quiet, cold fury that sat heavy in my chest. I understood then. It wasn't about the degree. It wasn't about the party. It was about them, about how they had always seen me as lesser, how they had never believed in me. And in that moment, I decided that this day would be the turning point. I wasn't going to beg for their validation anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life. As the party continued around me, filled with forced smiles and hollow congratulations from distant relatives, I slipped into the background. I didn't need to make a scene, didn't need to scream or fight back. No, I'd learned over the years that silence could be more powerful than any words. The time for begging for their approval was over. It was time to take control, and I would start by doing it in the quietest, most effective way I knew. The drive home from the party was a blur. The streets seemed to stretch out endlessly before me as I gripped the wheel, my thoughts spinning faster than the tires could turn. It wasn't the words my father had shouted that lingered. They'd been harsh, yes, but I was used to them. No, what lingered was the deep, gnawing ache of something I had finally accepted. My family wasn't just dysfunctional, they were toxic. For years, I had tried to fit into their mold, to become the person they wanted me to be, always striving to prove that I was worthy of their love. It was a cycle of constant disappointment, each attempt to make them proud falling short, leaving me hollow. But that day, as I watched them ignore me, I realized I had been seeking validation from the wrong people all along. I remembered the countless times I'd come home with a report card, hoping my father would at least acknowledge my hard work. His response was always the same. "You're not a doctor. You're not making enough money. Try harder." And then there was my mother, always quietly disappointed when I didn't meet her standards of perfection. She never said it outright, but her silence said it all. My mind flashed back to when I was a child, when I'd cried for the love I never got, when I'd stayed up late just to get a pat on the back for something I should have been naturally good at. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. And then there was my sister, lazy, entitled, always getting away with everything. I could never understand how she could do so little and yet receive so much. My parents always had an excuse for her. "She's young," they'd say, "she'll figure it out." But me? I was the one expected to be perfect, to do it all, to be the responsible one. I was the one who had to make the money, make the grade, and bear the emotional weight of a family that didn't care about me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about one graduation day. It was about a lifetime of silently tolerating the abuse, the neglect, the constant undermining of everything I did. And I couldn't do it anymore. The person I had been, the person who had accepted all of this, was gone. The new person, the one who would finally take control, was just beginning to emerge. In that moment, something shifted. I had been living for everyone else for so long, always trying to gain their approval. But I realized that all along I had been forgetting one important thing. I needed to live for myself. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. And in the quiet of that car ride, with nothing but the hum of the engine and the vastness of the empty road before me, I made my decision. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to take charge of my own life, and I knew just where to start. The morning after my graduation party, the weight of my decision felt both heavy and liberating. I sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows over the room. The silence of the house was almost deafening. I had a choice now, either to continue living the way I always had, drowning in my family's expectations and emotional abuse, or to step away and reclaim the power I had given them over my life for so long. As I sat there, I let my thoughts settle. The path forward was clear. There would be no grand confrontation, no shouting match with my parents. That wasn't my style. I had grown beyond the need for their approval or their attention. No, the power was in the subtlety, in the quiet rebellion that would hurt them more than anything loud or obvious could. I didn't need to beg for their respect. I was going to take control of my life, silently, quietly, but decisively. I pulled up my bank account on my phone and navigated to the automatic payment settings. There, in black and white, was the $2,300 automatic rent payment I had been making every month for years. Rent for the house they lived in, the house that, for as long as I could remember, had been the symbol of my compliance to their every demand. This was the payment that kept them comfortable, that kept them from ever facing the consequences of their own irresponsibility. My father, who refused to acknowledge my accomplishments, would never know the quiet sacrifice I had made, the financial stability I had provided them in the background, just to keep them from blaming me for their own failures. Without a second thought, I pressed the button to cancel the payment. The confirmation screen flashed before me, and with it came an odd sense of relief. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the rent. It was about the principle, about taking back control of my life from two people who had never acknowledged my worth. I closed my phone and leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the moment sink in. My parents had always taken so much from me, my time, my energy, my emotional well-being, but I had never asked for anything in return. I had silently supported them, always the responsible one, always the good child. I realized now that the only way to break free from the suffocating cycle was to cut the ties that bound me to them. But that was only the beginning. I wasn't going to stop there. A wave of clarity washed over me, and I knew what I had to do next. It would be swift, quiet, and irreversible. They wouldn't see it coming. I wasn't angry. No, anger had no place in this. This was about self-preservation. This was about me finally standing up for myself, without a single word of explanation. They had never cared to listen before, and they certainly wouldn't listen now. I stood up from the table, my decision made. I was going to take back everything that had once been mine, and I would do it without any dramatic speeches, no blame placed at their feet. I would simply make the choices that would ensure I could live the life I deserved, one free from the emotional burdens they had placed on me for far too long. I walked to the door, my keys in hand. The car, the one that I had put under my name to help them out when they needed it, was the next step. It was time to reclaim it. The first step in my silent rebellion had been taken. There was no turning back now. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual, each mile stretching out as I prepared myself for what was to come. The world outside the car window was a blur, my thoughts consumed with the quiet storm brewing inside me. The decision to cancel the rent payment had been liberating, but it was only the beginning. Now, I was about to take the car back, something that had always been a symbol of their comfort and my silent sacrifices. It wasn't about the car itself, but what it represented, my constant role as the responsible one, the one who always cleaned up the messes they made, the one who bore the weight of their expectations without a word of thanks. I pulled up in front of their house, the familiar place where I had spent so many years playing the dutiful child. My parents' house looked just the same as it always had, the garden neatly trimmed, the front door freshly painted. But today it felt like a prison to me, one I had built for myself out of years of misplaced loyalty and emotional exhaustion. As I sat there in the car, looking at the house, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. This wasn't a decision I was making on a whim. This was a turning point, a moment that would mark the end of my self-imposed servitude. I turned off the engine, the silence inside the car almost deafening. I knew my parents would be inside, probably sitting in the living room, engrossed in their usual routine. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that the child they had once known, always available, always obedient, was gone. It was hard to reconcile the person I had been with the person I was becoming, but there was no turning back now. I had to do this, not just for my own peace, but for my own survival. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car, locking the door behind me. As I made my way to the front door, I felt an odd sense of calm. My heart didn't race. There was no anger, no frustration, just a quiet determination. I had been angry once, yes, but now I understood something that had eluded me for so long. Silence was the most powerful weapon I could wield. I didn't need to yell or demand anything. I didn't need to make a scene. I simply needed to take back control in the most dignified way possible. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, looking at me with that familiar, disapproving look she often gave when I wasn't meeting her expectations. She was silent for a moment, her gaze flicking over me, as though trying to assess my mood. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice casual, but I could hear the edge of concern hidden beneath it. She wasn't used to me showing up unannounced, especially not after everything that had happened at the graduation party. "I'm here to take the car," I said, my voice calm, steady. The words fell from my lips with an almost eerie quietness, as if this moment was predestined, as if there was no other option left for me. Her eyes widened, the shock registering slowly on her face. "What do you mean, take the car?" she asked, her voice rising in confusion. "Why? We need it. You can't just take it." "I can," I replied, keeping my tone even. "It's mine. I've been paying for it, maintaining it, and making sure it runs. But you've been using it like it's a given. So today I'm taking it back. Consider it part of my graduation gift to myself." Her face fell. There was a flicker of panic, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile, one that had been perfected over years of pretending everything was fine. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. The truth hung heavy in the air between us. She knew why. She just didn't want to face it. But she would have to. And just like the rent payment, the car was only the beginning. I was done playing the role they had written for me. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of my father standing in the doorway of the living room, watching me with a blank expression. His eyes met mine for the briefest moment, and I could almost hear the unspoken question, "What are you doing?" But this time there was no answer, no explanation, no apology. I simply walked away, and for the first time in my life, it felt like I was walking towards something far better than anything they could ever offer. The days that followed were oddly peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of my family's expectations no longer hung over me, and the space I had created for myself felt like a breath of fresh air. I had done what I needed to do to regain control, to assert my independence in a way that didn't involve begging for validation. And as much as I had expected some form of retaliation or drama from my parents, the silence that followed was almost eerie. The first few days after I took back the car and canceled the rent payment, I had expected some kind of confrontation. I had imagined my parents calling, shouting, demanding answers. But there was nothing, not a single word. I had always prided myself on my ability to read people, to sense when something was brewing beneath the surface. But this silence, it was different. It was a silence laced with fear. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, even though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It wasn't until I received an unexpected letter that I began to understand the depth of the consequences of my actions. The letter came in the mail on a Thursday afternoon. It was from the bank, the same bank that had been handling my parents' mortgage for years. I opened it, and my heart sank as I read the first few lines. "Dear, my name. We are writing to inform you that we have recently noticed a discrepancy in your account records. Specifically, a large sum of money has been withdrawn from your account to cover the outstanding balance on your parents' mortgage." I read the letter over and over, my mind racing. The bank had sent the payment for my parents' mortgage in my name without my permission. The amount, over $500,000, was a sum I never authorized. My name had been attached to their loan without my knowledge, without my consent, and now I was being held responsible for the payments. I had never signed any paperwork. I had never agreed to this. Yet here I was, tied to a mortgage I didn't even know existed. My heart began to race as I reread the letter again, scanning the fine print. There it was, my signature, or rather, someone had forged my signature on the loan documents, attaching me as a cosigner. I didn't know how or when it had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. My parents had done this to me. They had quietly added my name to their debts, to their financial irresponsibility, without ever telling me. They had used me as collateral for their mistakes, all while pretending like everything was fine. They knew I would pick up the pieces. I had always done so, silently and without question, but not anymore. I stood up from the table, the letters still clutched in my hand. My anger wasn't fiery, but cold, simmering beneath the surface. I could feel the familiar sting of betrayal, but this time it wasn't the type that left me crying in silence. This time it fueled something deeper within me, a quiet rage, a resolve to take control in the only way that would matter. I spent the rest of the day figuring out my next move. The bank had given me an ultimatum, pay up or face legal action. But I wasn't going to cave in. I wasn't going to let them use me as a scapegoat for their financial recklessness. The decision to remove myself from their financial lives had already been made. But now I needed to take it one step further. The following day, I called my lawyer. I needed someone to help me navigate the mess my parents had created. I had to untangle myself from their debts, from the years of manipulation and control they had exerted over me. I couldn't let them win, not this time. As I sat in the lawyer's office later that week, I began to feel a sense of calm wash over me. The lawyer assured me that the situation could be resolved, but it would take time. It wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared. I had learned long ago that silence was powerful. Now, I would let my actions speak louder than any words could. But in the back of my mind, I knew this was only the beginning. The real battle wouldn't come from the bank. It would come from my parents. And when the truth finally sank in for them, that I wasn't going to be their fallback anymore, they would face the consequences of their actions. The days after I took back the car and canceled the rent payments were eerily quiet, a kind of calm before the storm I knew was coming. I kept my distance from my parents, letting them simmer in the consequences of their actions. There was no immediate response, no angry calls or frantic texts. It was almost like they were waiting for me to cave in, to beg for forgiveness. But this time, I wasn't going to do that. Then it happened. 5 days after my final act of defiance, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice, shaky and distant, came through the line. "Are you coming by today?" she asked, as if nothing had changed. "No," I replied flatly. "I'm not coming by today." Her voice faltered. "We need to talk about this. Your father is upset. You're making things harder than they need to be." Harder? For whom? For them, maybe. But not for me. I had carried their weight for far too long. I wasn't going to shoulder their burdens any longer. "No, Mom," I said, my tone steady. "I think you've been making things hard for me for years. I've done everything for you, and this is how you repay me? You put me on a loan I didn't even know about. You've used my name, my trust, and now I'm stuck with your debt." There was a pause, a long, painful silence. Then her voice cracked. "You don't understand. We did this because we love you. We thought it would help you." The anger that had been simmering within me finally broke through. "Help me? By chaining me to your mess? By making me responsible for everything you failed at? I didn't ask for your help. I never did." Another long pause. I could almost hear the weight of her regret, but I felt nothing. "I'm done," I added, my voice calm but resolute. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore." I hung up without another word. The phone felt heavy in my hand, but the peace that followed was undeniable. I had finally done it. I had taken back control, and nothing was going to make me regret it. The days after my conversation with my mother felt strange, almost like I was floating in a space between the past and the future. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still there, simmering beneath the surface. But there was something else, too, a sense of clarity. I had taken a stand. I had walked away from the cycle that had kept me chained to their mistakes for so long. And as the days passed, I began to feel a shift inside me. It was as if the weight of their expectations had been lifted, even though I knew the hardest part was still coming. I didn't expect them to just let things go. They never did before, and I wasn't about to fool myself into thinking this time would be different. I knew that eventually they'd come knocking, and when they did, I would be ready. The call came on a Friday afternoon, 2 days after I had canceled everything. My father's voice was cold, more controlled than I had ever heard it before. "You need to fix this," he said, his words clipped. "Your mother is beside herself. We've had enough of your childish behavior." I could feel the familiar sting of guilt creeping in, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about me being childish. This was about standing up for myself, something I had never been allowed to do before. "You should have thought of that before you dragged me into your mess," I said, my voice steady. "You don't get to make decisions for me anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the tension almost palpable. "You're ruining everything," my father finally muttered, his voice low and tinged with anger. "We've always been a family. What kind of person are you to just walk away like this?" I felt a sense of calm wash over me, despite the guilt that threatened to rise. "The kind of person who has had enough," I said quietly. "I'm not going to carry your burdens anymore. I'm done." The line went silent again, and for the first time I realized something. They weren't going to change. No amount of guilt, no amount of manipulation would ever make them see me as an individual with my own needs and desires. I wasn't going to beg them for approval anymore. I had already made my choice, and now I had to live with it. And so I did. Weeks passed in a strange, unsettling peace. There was no immediate fallout from my decision to cut ties, no frantic calls or messages pleading for my return. My parents, I realized, were waiting for me to break. They thought I would eventually regret my actions, feel the weight of my choices, and beg for their forgiveness. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going back, not this time. I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself, even if it meant losing everything I had known. I went about my days with a new sense of autonomy, living my life the way I wanted, free from the chains they had bound me with for so long. It wasn't easy, but I felt stronger than I had ever felt. I no longer depended on their approval, no longer needed their validation. I had learned to trust myself, to find peace in my own decisions, and for once I felt truly free. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I came home to find their car parked outside my house. My heart sank, but I didn't feel the familiar rush of panic. I knew this moment was inevitable. They had come, not to apologize, but to make me feel guilty, to pull me back into their world of manipulation and control. But I was ready for them. I opened the door, and there they were, my father, rigid with anger, and my mother, her face pale and tear-streaked. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice colder than usual. "I'm listening," I replied, standing firm. I wasn't going to make this easy for them. "We don't understand," my mother began, her voice faltering. "Why did you do this?" "We thought we were helping you. We thought you needed us." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You didn't think about what I needed. You never asked. You used me and I allowed it. But not anymore." Silence hung in the air, and for the first time I saw something different in their eyes, regret. It wasn't enough, though. They couldn't undo the past, and neither could I. "I'm sorry," my mother whispered, but it was too late. "I know," I said quietly, closing the door behind them. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free.